The quiet hum of the Galactic Council's chamber carried an air of tension that no one dared to acknowledge aloud. Across the vast hall, representatives from countless alien species sat in uncomfortable silence, their expressions a mix of unease and apprehension. They had been summoned for an urgent matter, though most already had an idea of what it was. The screens at the center of the chamber flickered to life, and the image of a scarred, elderly alien commander appeared. His tired, weathered eyes surveyed the room before he began to speak, his voice firm but tinged with something far heavier, fear. "Let me tell you all a story," he started, his gaze locking onto the gathered audience. "Because some of you seem to have forgotten why everyone does not, under any circumstances, fight the humans." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room at his words. Some of the younger council members exchanged skeptical glances, as if doubting the need for such caution. After all, humanity was still to many an enigma. Their planets were small compared to the sprawling empires of the galaxy, their numbers far fewer than some species. And yet, everyone who knew even a fragment of their history understood one unshakable truth: humans were not to be provoked. The commander's voice grew quieter, almost a whisper, as he continued. "You may look at them now, those quiet, scattered colonies, those seemingly ordinary creatures, and wonder what makes them so dangerous. You see their ships docked peacefully at galactic trade stations. You see them smile, joke, and exchange stories in common halls. But that," he paused, "is the surface. What lies beneath is something ancient, something feral that no other species in this universe possesses. It's something I saw firsthand, many years ago." The room went still as the commander leaned forward, his words dripping with the weight of memory. "It was supposed to be a simple campaign. My fleet belonged to one of the largest alliances in the galaxy at the time, an empire that had conquered countless worlds and bent thousands of systems to its will. The humans were nothing to us then. Primitive, we thought. Unorganized. Weak. Their technology was leagues behind ours, their defenses laughable compared to our armies. So we landed on one of their colonies, intent on teaching them the consequences of refusing our demands." He fell silent for a moment, the memory clearly haunting him. No one interrupted as he gathered himself and spoke again. "We came in force, shining dreadnoughts, blotting out their skies, weapons hot, ready to bring them to their knees. They should have been afraid. Any other species would have surrendered at the sight of our ships alone. But the humans? No. The moment we touched their soil, we saw it in their eyes. It wasn't fear. It was something far worse. It was resolve." The commander shook his head slowly, as if still trying to understand. "They didn't have the same weapons we did. Their ships were smaller, their guns weaker, but they didn't care. They fought. Not for survival, not out of desperation, but because it's what they are. Every human we faced fought like a cornered animal, willing to give everything for their people, their homes, their honor. And when one fell, 10 more stood in their place. They didn't retreat. They didn't beg. And as the days turned into weeks, we realized something horrifying: humans never stop fighting. They don't break like other species. They don't falter." Across the chamber, some of the representatives were leaning forward now, their skepticism giving way to uneasy fascination. Others sat rigidly still, as though the commander's words had awakened something primal in them, something they wished to forget. "Our fleet was massive," the commander continued. "We had numbers, technology, strategy. And yet, we lost. Not because our weapons failed. Not because they outgunned us. No. We lost because we were not ready to fight something as relentless, as ferocious, as humanity. Their soldiers fought until their bodies gave out, and their civilians took up arms as if it were second nature. Even when we burned their cities, they pushed back. Even when we cut off their supply lines, they adapted. And in the end, we realized what we were up against, a species that sees adversity as fuel for the fire burning inside them. The room was silent now. The murmurs had vanished, replaced by the weight of the commander's tale. He looked out at them, his eyes full of a warning that he hoped they would heed. The day we retreated when we abandoned that colony was the day we learned the truth. Humans do not fight for conquest or power. They fight for each other, for something deeper than any of us can understand. And when you give them a reason to fight, you unleash something unstoppable, something that will not rest until you are destroyed. The youngest representative, a wide-eyed member of a species known for its arrogance, dared to raise a hand. But surely, the young alien stammered, if humans are so dangerous, why haven't they conquered the galaxy by now? What stops them from taking everything? The commander's lips twisted into something that could have been a grim smile. That's the question, isn't it? Why don't they? It's not because they can't. It's because they choose not to. Humanity doesn't fight because they want to rule. They fight because they have to when the time comes. And if you force their hand gods help you. The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time, many in the room understood the gravity of the unspoken agreement that had kept humans at peace with the rest of the galaxy. It wasn't respect, and it wasn't pity. It was fear. The kind of fear that could only come from facing a predator that chooses, out of mercy or patience, not to hunt you. The commander sat back in his seat, his story finished. But before the meeting could adjourn, one last message appeared on the glowing screen, a transmission intercepted from the edge of human space. It was a short, chilling recording. Grainy footage of a single human ship standing its ground against a fleet 10 times its size. And as the recording ended, the final words spoken by the human captain echoed through the chamber. "We warned you." The screen flickered off, leaving only darkness and silence. The council sat frozen, the weight of those words lingering like a shadow over the room. Somewhere, out in the stars, humanity waited. And as the commander had made so painfully clear, the last thing anyone wanted was to give them a reason to fight again. The silence in the chamber hung heavy, every being present lost in thought. For many, the story they'd just heard was difficult to comprehend. The younger members of the council, those who had only read about humanity in cold, clinical records, struggled to reconcile the image of quiet, seemingly ordinary humans with the relentless, unyielding warriors described by the commander. Whispers started to ripple through the assembly again, quiet murmurs of disbelief and uncertainty. Yet, beneath the skepticism lay an undercurrent of fear, undeniable and growing. The elder commander sat quietly, observing the reactions around him. He had said his piece, knowing full well that many would dismiss his warnings, just as others had before. Still, he couldn't shake the memories, those haunting moments that had burned themselves into his mind. His hand unconsciously traced the deep scar running along his arm, a relic from a battle that had taken place decades ago, but felt as fresh as yesterday. One of the more senior counselors, a tall, serpentine creature with silver scales that gleamed under the chamber's lights, broke the silence. Commander, it hissed, its voice smooth but laced with skepticism. Your story is compelling. I'll grant you that. But surely, you exaggerate. No species, not even humans, could possibly withstand an empire as vast as the one you described. I've read the records of that campaign. They speak of losses, yes, but nothing on the scale of what you've suggested. The commander's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. The records are wrong, he said sharply, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. What you've read is what the Empire wanted you to read. They downplayed the defeat, hid the full extent of their failure to save face. But I was there. I saw the truth with my own eyes. The counselor leaned forward, its tongue flicking out as if tasting the tension in the air. And what truth is that, Commander? That a backwater species outmatched one of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy? That they somehow achieved the impossible? Yes, the commander replied without hesitation, his voice steady. Because that's exactly what they did. And they didn't do it with technology or numbers. They did it with something far more dangerous. Something none of us could anticipate. He leaned forward, his gaze piercing. Do you know what humans call it? They call it willpower. And it's something no amount of strategy or firepower can overcome. The counselor scoffed, leaning back in its seat. But the tension in the room was palpable. Others were beginning to shift uncomfortably, their expressions betraying their unease. They had all heard whispers about humanity's resilience, tales passed down through generations like ghost stories told around a fire. But hearing it spoken of so plainly, so vividly, was something else entirely. Another voice broke the silence, this one calm but weighted with curiosity. Commander, if what you say is true, why do humans seem so peaceful now? Why haven't they sought revenge for what your empire did to them? Why haven't they expanded, conquered, or demanded retribution? The commander sighed, leaning back in his chair. For a moment, he looked impossibly weary, as though the weight of the past was finally catching up to him. That's the question, isn't it? He said quietly. It's the same question I've asked myself 1,000 times. Why don't they retaliate? Why don't they use that fire inside them to take what they deserve? And the only answer I've ever come up with is this: they don't want to. Humans don't fight for power or domination. They fight because they're forced to, because they have no other choice. And as long as we don't give them a reason to fight, they'll remain peaceful. But the moment we push them too far, he trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. The chamber was silent again, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone present. Even the skeptical counselor seemed at a loss for a response. It was then that the doors to the chamber slid open with a hiss, and a messenger hurried inside, their expression urgent. Counselors, they said, bowing deeply, we've received a report from the Outer Rim. A skirmish between one of our patrols and a human vessel. The room erupted into chaos, voices overlapping as representatives demanded answers. The commander's heart sank. He had hoped, prayed that humanity's warning would hold, that no one would be foolish enough to provoke them again. But it seemed his fears were coming to pass. Silence! The council's speaker bellowed, slamming a gavel against the table. The room fell quiet, all eyes turning to the messenger. What happened? The speaker demanded. Why was there a skirmish? The messenger hesitated, their eyes darting nervously around the room. The details are still unclear, they admitted. But it seems one of our patrol ships intercepted a human transport near a restricted zone. They attempted to board the vessel. The commander closed his eyes, a wave of dread washing over him. He could already imagine what had happened next. The humans wouldn't have fired the first shot. They never did. But once provoked, they would have responded with the full force of their terrifying resolve. And the outcome? The speaker pressed, their tone sharp. The messenger swallowed hard. The patrol ship was destroyed. Completely. There were no survivors. The chamber erupted into chaos once more, the representatives shouting over one another in a cacophony of panic and outrage. The commander remained silent, his gaze fixed on the table in front of him. He knew what was coming next. This wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a spark, one that could ignite a fire no one in the galaxy would be able to extinguish. As the council argued, the commander rose from his seat, his movements deliberate and slow. The speaker noticed and called for order, the room falling silent once more. "Commander," the speaker said, their tone wary, "what do you make of this?" The commander looked around the room, his expression grave. "I warned you," he said simply. "You've poked the bear. Now you'll have to deal with the consequences." The room descended into stunned silence, the weight of his words sinking in. For the first time, the representatives truly understood the gravity of the situation. Humanity's fire had been reignited, and there was no telling what would happen next. All they could do now was wait and hope that the humans would show mercy. The council chamber remained in tense silence, broken only by the faint hum of the holographic displays flickering around them. The messenger had departed, leaving the weight of their report hanging in the air. The representatives exchanged uneasy glances, each silently hoping someone else would be the first to speak. For all their posturing, their advanced technology, and their long-standing dominion over the galaxy, fear had taken hold. The commander stood motionless, his mind racing. He had been through enough battles to recognize the signs. This wasn't just an isolated skirmish. This was the beginning of something much larger, much deadlier. Yet, he could tell from the looks on their faces that most of the council still didn't fully grasp the danger they were in. Their arrogance had blinded them, their belief in their own superiority blinding them to the storm that was now on the horizon. Finally, the speaker cleared their throat, their voice brittle but attempting to project authority. "We cannot act rashly," they said, though the tremor in their voice betrayed their nerves. "This incident is unfortunate, but it doesn't mean open conflict is inevitable. Perhaps we can negotiate," the commander interrupted, his tone sharp. "Do you think they'll sit down and talk after what's happened? After you sent a patrol to board one of their ships? The time for diplomacy ended the moment you crossed the line. You provoked them, and humans don't forget." The speaker bristled at his words, but they didn't argue. Deep down, they knew he was right. Still, the council wasn't ready to admit defeat. Not yet. Another representative, one with a voice like grinding metal, spoke up. "We're the most advanced alliance in the galaxy," they said. "Our fleets outnumber theirs 100-1. They may have destroyed a patrol ship, but they stand no chance against us in a real battle." The commander let out a bitter laugh, a sound devoid of humor. "You still don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice low but carrying through the chamber. "This isn't about numbers. It's about resolve. Humans don't fight unless they have to. But when they do, they don't stop. They don't surrender. They don't back down, no matter how impossible the odds. They'll burn themselves to ashes before they let anyone dominate them." The room fell quiet again, the weight of his words sinking in. The councilors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the bravado fading from their expressions. Even the most skeptical among them couldn't deny the unease that had taken hold. They had all seen the reports, the whispers from the shadows about what had happened centuries ago during humanity's last war. Entire fleets wiped out, colonies reduced to rubble. The Empire's pride shattered in the face of humanity's unrelenting determination. And now, it seemed, history was about to repeat itself. "Then what do you propose we do, Commander?" the speaker asked, their voice sharp with desperation. "Sit back and wait for them to retaliate. Let them pick us off one by one. If they're as dangerous as you claim, then we can't afford to wait." The commander hesitated. He had seen firsthand what happened when fear dictated decisions. It only led to more chaos, more destruction. But he also knew that trying to reason with the council was futile. They were too set in their ways, too unwilling to admit their own mistakes. The best he could do now was prepare for the inevitable. Before he could respond, another message came through. This time, it wasn't a messenger, but a holographic projection that appeared in the center of the chamber. A figure stood within the light, their form unmistakably human. They wore a simple uniform, devoid of insignias or markings, but their presence was commanding. Their expression was calm, almost unnervingly so, as they surveyed the room. "I am Captain Vega of the Human Expeditionary Fleet," the figure said, their voice steady and measured. "We received word of an unprovoked attack on one of our ships. In response, we've dispatched a fleet to the sector. We are not here to conquer or destroy, but we will defend ourselves if necessary." The chamber erupted into chaos once more, the representatives shouting over one another in panic and outrage. The commander, however, focused on the human's face. There was no malice there, no anger, only a quiet determination that was far more terrifying than any threat could ever be. "We have no desire for war," the captain continued, their voice cutting through the noise. "But know this, if you force our hand, we will fight. And we will not stop until the threat to our people is eliminated. Choose your next move wisely." With that, the hologram disappeared, leaving the council in stunned silence. Commander took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the tension in the room, the unspoken question hanging in the air. What would they do now? He turned to the speaker, his expression grim. "You wanted to know what to do," he said. "I'll tell you. Stand down. Withdraw your fleets, apologize, and pray they accept it. Because if you don't, this won't end with a skirmish. It'll end with all of us burned to the ground." The speaker hesitated, their face pale. "And if they don't accept?" they asked quietly. The commander's gaze hardened. "Then may the stars have mercy on us. Because the humans won't." The chamber remained silent, the weight of the decision pressing down on everyone present. For the first time, the council truly understood the stakes. But whether they would listen to the commander's warning or let their arrogance lead them to ruin remained to be seen. And as the tension in the room reached its breaking point, the commander couldn't help but wonder if it was already too late. The room's silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Every council member weighed down by the implications of Captain Vega's words. The air felt colder, heavier, as if the hologram had left behind a tangible sense of dread. The speaker's fingers drummed anxiously against the table, a hollow sound that echoed through the chamber. They had been proud, overconfident in their supposed superiority. Now, they teetered on the edge of panic. Before anyone could break the stillness, a sharp chime pierced the room. Another message. The commander's stomach tightened as the holographic display flickered to life once again. This time, the image wasn't of a human, but of one of their own scouts, their face pale and drenched in sweat. The scout's voice trembled as they delivered their report. "We have a situation. A human fleet has arrived in the outer system. Our forces engaged them unprovoked, but, sir, we were obliterated." The scout paused to take a shaky breath, as if recalling the memory itself was too much to bear. "They're not like we anticipated. They're adapting. Every time we counter, they change tactics. It's as though they're learning with each engagement. One fleet destroyed an entire battalion in minutes and barely took damage." The council chamber descended into chaos. Shouts erupted from every direction. Some were demanding action reinforcements, retaliation, while others were pleading for diplomacy or retreat. The commander clenched his fists as the noise rose around him. They weren't listening. None of them. It was the same story every time. They underestimated humanity, saw them as little more than a nuisance. Now, they were learning the truth the hard way. The speakers slammed their hand against the table, their voice sharp and commanding. "Enough." The chamber fell into a shaky silence, council members sitting stiffly in their seats. "We cannot allow fear to cloud our judgment," the speaker said, though the slight tremor in their voice betrayed the fear they tried to suppress. "If the humans are learning, then we will adapt as well. We are the council. We have ruled this galaxy for eons. A species as young as theirs cannot hope to stand against us." The commander shook his head, his jaw tight. "They're not just learning tactics," he said, his voice cutting through the posturing. "They're learning us. Every battle teaches them who we are, how we think, how we fight. That's what makes them so dangerous. You send one fleet, they destroy it, and know how to defeat the next. You're feeding the fire." Before the speaker could respond, the hologram of the scout blinked and stuttered. A new figure replaced it, an ominous blur at first before snapping into sharp focus. It wasn't a soldier or fleet captain, but someone far more unexpected, a human civilian. Their clothes were torn, stained with dirt and soot. Behind them, faint flames flickered, casting shadows on their grim face. They stared into the camera with unflinching intensity, their voice calm but edged with bitterness. "Your empire thinks it can crush us," they began, each word deliberate and weighted. "You don't understand. You came into our systems, boarded our ships, and dared to challenge us. You see us as primitive, as weak. But we are not like you. We don't conquer because we crave power. We don't fight because we enjoy it. We fight because survival is in our blood." The flames behind the humans seemed to grow brighter, the reflection flickering in their unblinking eyes. "You've lit a fire that you can't extinguish. Every city you destroy, every ship you target, every life you take only strengthens our resolve. You see ruins, we see opportunities. You see defeat, we see the next step forward. You'll learn soon enough why no one fights the humans and wins." The transmission cut out abruptly, leaving behind a ringing silence that settled over the council like a suffocating shroud. Even the most arrogant of the representatives now looked pale, their bravado finally crumbling under the weight of what they'd seen. The flames hadn't just been a backdrop, they were a message. Humanity wasn't just fighting back. They were refusing to be broken. The commander exhaled slowly, his chest tight with a mixture of dread and reluctant admiration. He'd warned them. He'd tried to tell them what they were dealing with, but they hadn't listened. Now, it was too late to stop what was coming. Suddenly, Another alert blared through the chamber, this one accompanied by a series of holographic warnings flashing red across the displays. The council members tensed as a new report streamed in. Proximity alarm activated in the central sector. An automated voice droned. Unidentified ships detected. Scans inconclusive. Signal indicates non-council fleet. The chamber descended into chaos again as the implications set in. They were here. The humans had arrived, and they were no longer hiding in the shadows. The commander rushed to the control panel and pulled up the live feed. A massive fleet loomed on the edges of the council's territory, their ships dark and unassuming but unmistakably human. The fleet moved like a single organism, perfectly synchronized. No wasted motion. It wasn't an invasion force, not yet, but it was a warning. "Pull back the border fleets," the commander ordered sharply, his voice cutting through the panicked shouts. "Do it now, before this escalates further." But the speaker rose to their feet, their face twisted with stubborn defiance. "We will not be cowed by these savages," they spat. "We are the council. No one challenges us without facing the consequences." The commander spun toward them, his temper finally breaking. "This isn't about your pride," he roared. "This is about survival. You've seen what they can do. You think they'll stop now that they're here? They won't. You're giving them no choice but to burn us to the ground." The speaker opened their mouth to argue, but before they could, another alarm blared through the room. The holographic feed shifted to display the human fleet, now surging forward. Lights erupted along the ships, energy readings spiking as weapons systems came online. There was no mistaking it now. The humans weren't waiting any longer. They were done sending warnings. In the council chamber, fear took over. The representatives scrambled for solutions, shouting over one another as chaos reigned. The commander stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the advancing fleet. He knew this was only the beginning. The humans hadn't come to negotiate. They had come to make a point, one that the council had ignored for far too long. "You should have listened," he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible over the alarms. "Now it's too late." The human ship surged into the system, a silent force of nature, and the first shots were fired. The war had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. The human fleet advanced like a storm, cutting through the Council's defenses with terrifying precision. Their ships moved in perfect coordination, each maneuver designed to exploit weaknesses, every strike timed to perfection. The Council's fleets, despite their advanced technology, were overwhelmed. Desperate orders echoed through command centers across the galaxy, but none could hold back the tide. The humans had studied them, understood their patterns, and now they were unraveling everything the Council thought made them invincible. The commander watched the live feed in grim silence, his fists clenched at his sides. Battleships crumbled under volleys of fire, stations blinked out one by one, and entire sectors were cut off as the humans advanced. It wasn't just brute force. It was a calculated, methodical dismantling of everything the Council had built. The speaker sat slumped in their chair, their face pale, their voice silenced by the reality they could no longer deny. They had mocked humanity's resolve, believing their fleets would swat the humans aside. Now, the Council's arrogance was burning around them. In the outer sectors, skirmishes turned into massacres. Human ships didn't hesitate, and they didn't slow down. It wasn't revenge. They weren't torturing survivors or destroying for sport. The humans moved with an unsettling calm, wiping out only what was necessary to break resistance and advance. For them, this war was just a means to an end. There was no triumph, no gloating, only resolve. Reports flooded in from every corner of the empire. Colonies had gone dark. Fleets were missing. And yet, as the humans pushed further into Council space, a strange shift began to occur. Not every human ship fired on sight. Some bypassed critical stations, leaving infrastructure untouched. Scattered survivors reported witnessing fleets pulling back after crippling defenses, leaving no trace of themselves but the silence in their wake. The commander narrowed his eyes as he replayed the patterns on the map. "They're not here to destroy us," he muttered to himself, a realization dawning like a distant light in the darkness. He turned sharply to the remaining council members, many of whom were frozen in despair. "They don't want this war. They want us to understand." The council speaker looked up, their voice trembling. "Understand what? They've burned entire sectors, wiped out fleets. If this isn't destruction, what is it?" The commander stared at the maps once more. "Restraint," he said quietly. "They could have leveled everything by now, but they haven't. They're holding back. They're showing us what they're capable of without unleashing their full power." He paused, his voice growing cold. "They're giving us one last chance." At that moment, the chamber lights flickered, and a final message began broadcasting across every display. The humans were no longer hacking through the council's systems. They had full control. The screens filled with the image of a human fleet captain. Unlike the previous transmissions, this one felt deliberate, as though it were meant to reach every corner of the galaxy. The captain stood tall, their face weathered but resolute, their voice calm as they spoke. "You called us primitive. You thought we were weak. That belief led you here." The captain gestured to the stars behind them, a backdrop of council systems now darkened and silent. "We didn't ask for this war. We didn't seek it. But when you came to our worlds and destroyed what we loved, you left us with no choice but to fight back. You underestimated what we would do to survive." The captain leaned closer, their voice dropping, as if speaking directly to every member of the council. "We are not like you. We don't seek to dominate. We fight to defend what's ours. And if you push us, we will push back harder than you can imagine. This war ends now, not because we can't destroy you, but because we choose not to." The screen flickered, and the human fleet appeared again in the background. Their ships, still in perfect formation, began to pull back. The commanders across council space watched in disbelief as the humans disengaged, retreating to the edges of their systems. They hadn't claimed territory. They hadn't conquered worlds. They had simply made their point one that no species in the galaxy would ever forget. In the silence that followed, the council chamber was filled with a strange mix of relief and unease. The humans had stopped, but at what cost? Entire fleets were lost, colonies were gone, and the scars of this war would last for generations. The speaker turned to the commander, their voice barely above a whisper. "Why? Why would they stop now?" The commander's expression was heavy as he stared at the empty screens. "Because they don't want to be our enemies. They wanted to show us what happens when we provoke them. They gave us a choice to learn from this or repeat it. If we're foolish enough to challenge them again, they won't hold back next time." Cross-council space, the humans' retreat sent shockwaves through every system. Rumors spread of their strength, of their resolve, and of their unexpected mercy. Survivors whispered of how the humans had spared critical infrastructure, of fleets that could have annihilated everything but instead chose to leave. And with every story, one lesson was made clear: you don't fight the humans. Not because you can't win, but because the cost of trying isn't worth what comes next. The commander stood in the quiet chamber long after the others had left. Outside, the stars burned as they always had, but something had changed. The council's reign of unquestioned power was over. They had been humbled. The humans had taught them a lesson that would ripple through history forever. And yet, as he watched the skies, the commander couldn't shake a lingering unease. The humans had shown restraint, but for how long? If the council forgot this lesson, if arrogance led them down the same path again, there would be no second chance. The humans would return, and next time they wouldn't stop. For now, the war was over, but the memory of it would never fade. The council would rebuild, scars and all, and the name of humanity would be spoken in hushed tones across the galaxy, not as conquerors, not as tyrants, but as a warning that echoed in the minds of every species that heard their story. Never fight the humans. The war was over, but the echoes of its devastation lingered. Across the shattered council systems, survivors emerged from hiding, gazing at the darkened skies with hollow eyes. Fleets that had once stood as symbols of the council's dominance now drifted in silence, their remains scattered across the stars like a graveyard no one dared visit. Planets were rebuilding, though many wondered if they would ever feel secure again. In the aftermath, one truth had become irrefutable: humanity had rewritten the rules of the galaxy. On Earth, far from the ruins of the Council's space, there was no celebration. There were no banners of victory or parades for returning soldiers. Humanity did not cheer for its triumph. Families were reunited, but many others stood at gravesites, looking into the wind where loved ones would never return. Humanity had won a war they never wanted, and the silence that followed victory weighed heavier than the conflict itself. On the Council's central homeworld, the assembly chamber was quiet for the first time in living memory. Leaders from countless species sat together, humbled and shaken. The Council's arrogance had almost cost them everything. None dared speak too loudly, as if raising their voices might somehow bring humanity's fleets roaring back. The scars of what had happened were etched in their systems, but they were also burned into their pride. The commander, now promoted to oversee the Council's future defense strategies, stood at the edge of the chamber, observing the tense quiet. The speaker, who had once mocked humanity as insignificant, now sat silently, their gaze distant as they stared at the council table. "We can't erase what happened," the speaker said finally, their voice low and unsteady. "The humans have left a mark on the galaxy that will never heal." The commander folded his arms, his tone far calmer than it had been before. "Maybe we needed that. Maybe we needed to be reminded that we're not untouchable." He looked at the others, their expressions reflecting everything from bitterness to fear. "We built this council believing we had already won. We thought we were the peak of civilization. But the humans—" He paused, considering his next words carefully. "The humans are something we don't understand yet." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Discussions turned from rebuilding to reflection. Across their species, scholars, leaders, and citizens asked the same questions. Who were the humans, really? What had shaped them to fight with such terrifying unity and resolve? Stories began to spread, not just of the war, but of Earth itself. Tales of a world where every step forward had been fought for. No other species had endured what humanity had: centuries of wars, disasters, and a planet that pushed them to the brink. It wasn't technology that made humanity dangerous. It was their will. The Council eventually sent emissaries back to Earth, their ships arriving with cautious intent. Humanity didn't refuse them, but their reception was distant. The humans had no desire for alliances, no interest in controlling Council politics. When the emissaries met with Earth's leaders, they asked the same question that had echoed across the stars. "Why did you stop?" A human general, a woman whose face bore the lines of countless battles, responded quietly. "Because we don't fight wars for pride. We fight to survive. You came to our home and left us no choice. But survival isn't about conquering. It's about knowing when to stop." The Council's emissaries left Earth with a message to share across their systems. Humanity had no intention of returning to their worlds as conquerors, but they would never allow their strength to be questioned again. The Council had been given a warning, and no species in the galaxy would forget it. The stories of Earth became legend, how humans, considered primitive and weak, had risen from the ashes of their own history to challenge an empire. Over time, the Council began to rebuild itself, though the relationships between species had changed forever. Those who had once felt invincible now walked more carefully. There was no room for arrogance in a galaxy where humanity existed. The commander, now a leading figure among the Council's military, ensured that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. He worked tirelessly, pushing for reforms that would prevent another war. Deep down, he knew the humans would be watching, waiting to see if the Council learned anything from the scars they'd been given. For humanity, life returned to something resembling peace, though it was never truly the same. Earth remained on high alert, its people aware that the galaxy now knew their strength. Children grew up hearing stories of the war, not as a tale of victory, but as a reminder of what could happen if peace was ever taken for granted. Humans looked to the stars not with ambition, but with caution. The Council's fleets had shown them what arrogance could cost, and humanity would never repeat their mistakes. Decades passed, and the war became history, its details told in hushed voices across countless worlds. On Council planets, elders warned their children about the humans, speaking of their terrifying precision and unbreakable will. Humanity became a cautionary tale, a lesson passed from generation to generation. When conflicts arose between species, leaders often invoked the same words that had ended wars before they began. "Do you want to wake the humans?" The commander, now old and gray, sat one evening beneath the vast skies of his homeworld. He watched the stars with an expression of quiet reflection. He thought of the fleets that had burned, the colonies that had gone silent, and the humans who had stopped when they didn't need to. Their mercy had been unexpected, and it had saved the galaxy from total ruin. A younger officer approached him, carrying reports of new developments in the Council's military. The officer hesitated, as if uncertain whether to interrupt. "Sir," he said finally, "there's talk among the outer colonies. Some say the humans might be preparing for something. Training, building. What if they come back?" The commander looked up, his expression unreadable. "If they come back, it won't be as conquerors. It never was. But if we force them into another war," he shook his head slowly, his voice calm but firm, "then we'll only have ourselves to blame." The officer nodded, falling silent as he looked toward the stars. For all the Council's advancements, for all their wisdom and technology, there was still so much they didn't understand about humanity. Some feared them, others respected them, but none doubted their strength. The commander's words echoed in the young officer's mind as he left. There were some wars you didn't start because you couldn't afford to lose. As the years stretched into centuries, the memory of the war became legend. The Council rebuilt stronger, wiser, and more unified. And Earth, though quiet, remained ever watchful. Humanity had no interest in ruling the galaxy, but they would never allow themselves to be forgotten. Across countless worlds, the same story was told, the story of a war that reshaped the stars. Children listened with wide eyes, their imaginations filled with tales of human ships blotting out the skies, of battles fought with terrifying precision, and of a species that had stopped when no one else would. Elders would end the tale with a single phrase that had been etched into the minds of all who lived through it. Never fight the humans. And as long as the stars burned, no one ever did.